The Misfits.
All right, what's up, everybody? Good morning. Happy Friday. And for those of you that are partaking, happy Halloween. It is Friday once again, which means it is time for Kingdom on the Road. This is the show where we dive deep into the Old Testament, all with the idea that our goal is to equip you with the ability to be able to navigate what is essentially 2/3 of the Bible well and with confidence. So if you are new to the show, the way it works is we go chapter by chapter, line by line, verse by verse. I'll go ahead and read it off, generally in the NLT, and then we'll talk about the chapter. As we go along, the way we do it is we look at the high points, the things that stand out to us, all of that sort of jazz. That's where you come in. If there are things that stand out to you, questions that you have, things that we do not address, go ahead and drop them in the comment section. Say good morning anyway, but we want to hear from you along the way. Even if you're watching the playback, we do pay attention to the comment section even after the fact. So, without further ado, we are jumping back into 2 Samuel, and we are picking up with chapter 6, again, reading out of the NLT. Then David again gathered all the elite troops in Israel, 30,000 in all. He led them to Bela of Judah, to bring back the Ark of God, which bears the name of the Lord of Heaven's armies, who is enthroned between the cherubim. They placed the Ark of God on a new cart and brought it from Abinadab's house, which was on a hill. Uzzah and Ahio, Abinadab's sons, were guiding the cart that carried the Ark of God. Ahio walked in front of the ark. David and all the people of Israel were celebrating before the Lord, singing songs and playing all kinds of musical instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. But when they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand and steadied the ark of God. Then the Lord's anger was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him dead because of this. So Uzzah died right there beside the Ark of God. David was angry because the Lord's anger had burst out against Uzzah. He named that place Perez Uzzah, which means the burst out against Uzzah, as it is still called today. David was now afraid of the Lord, and he asked, "How can I ever bring the ark of the Lord back into my care?" So David decided not to move the ark of the Lord into the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom of Gath. The ark of the Lord remained there in Obed-Edom's house for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his entire household. Then King David was told, "The Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's household and everything he has done because of the Ark of God." So David went there and brought the Ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with a great celebration. After the men who were carrying the Ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, David sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf, and David danced before the Lord with all his might, wearing a priestly garment. So David and all the people of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouts of joy and blowing of ram's horns. But as the ark of the Lord entered the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked down from her window. When she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she was filled with contempt for him. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the special tent David had prepared for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings to the Lord. When he had finished his sacrifices, David blessed the people in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies. Then he gave to every Israelite man and woman in the crowd a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins. Then all the people returned to their homes. When David returned home to bless his own family, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet him. She said in disgust, how disgusted the king of Israel looked, or distinguished the king of Israel looked today, shamelessly exposing himself to the servant girls like any vulgar person might do. David retorted to Michal, I was dancing before the Lord, who chose me above your father and all his people. He appointed me as the leader of Israel, the people of the Lord. So I celebrate before the Lord. Yes, and I am willing to look even more foolish than this, even to be humiliated in my own eyes. But those servant girls you mentioned will indeed think I am distinguished. So Michal, the daughter of Saul, remained childless throughout her entire life. There's a lot happening in this chapter. We kind of go the gambit from religious weirdness to this whole idea of what is proper conduct before the Lord, and a lot in between there. So let's start off with the religious weirdness, right? So I think it's I'll call them mystical or supernatural occurrences like this that are documented well within the Old Testament, that if unprepared for it and no context or grounding to put it into, can be fertile ground for going a little bit of here, there, and everywhere. Yeah. And so how do present day readers handle this section of scripture well? Andrew, we'll go ahead and start off with you.
Well, which part of the weirdness do we want to address first, I guess, is the question, because there's a couple of different places that I've seen this passage get used when talking about, the term that is used as the worship wars. I don't know if either of you are familiar with that term or not, but this idea of where you've got this denominational or interdenominational strife over what proper worship looks like. Hymns versus, contemporary music, dress, all those kind of things are different topics with it. But this passage gets used a lot within a couple of different spots. I
want to take the beat to bust Andrew's chops here for a second, because it's one of life's great joys to be able to do that on the air.
That's the only reason you invite me anymore.
The man goes, okay, let's cover like what part of the religious weirdness, and then jumps over all of that to get to the second part of the chapter to talk.
That's why I asked, because even the first part though has the same sort of thing, and I love the fact that my mod on Twitch is calling for a fight right now. But that's part of why I was, because there's like 3 or 4 different things that happen in this passage that get used within the worship wars stuff in different ways, whether it's the dress or the dancing or the touching of the ark or the reverence of God or wherever it's at. All of them get used by different people for different stuff. And that's why I was asking, where do we want to start? If we want to start at the beginning, we can, because
let's start off with the ark of God and everything that happens with that.
Yeah, it's the thing that is always interesting with it is I mean, there's a couple of things that are interesting with it, but like you've got the fact that God strikes down. It's the same thing we've talked about in other chapters throughout Samuel, right? Somebody that thought they were doing the right thing, and they ended up dead because they did the wrong thing instead.
Yep.
He thought he was protecting the ark of God. He thought he was keeping it steady. He thought he was doing the right thing. But literally one of the only things that God has told the people is don't touch it. And what's the one thing he does is he goes and touches it.
So camp there, because there are absolutely ways where this idea of don't touch it can get modernized, can get turned into, can be used for a stand-in for whatever, here, there, and everywhere. There's a lot of flavors to this, and so how do we handle a God that, on paper, if you have nothing to ground it in, if you haven't been tracking, if you wrestle with Old Testament God versus New Testament Jesus, you can read this and be like, what do I do with this specific command, what seems like on paper an honest mistake, and then God takes him out?
Yeah, and that's where, we've talked about this before about the, pre-cross, post-cross stuff, right? We've talked about that before, especially related to death in general. Whether it's the murders, whether it's the wiping out of people, whether it's God striking somebody down right here. In all these different situations, we're dealing with pre-cross situation. We are now post-cross, and so that changes the way that everything plays out. But the thing with the God striking somebody down for touching him, quote unquote, touching him, it would be the sort of thing as far as because his presence is in the ark. How do we relate that? This is something that I think the only way to understand it is we have to, unfortunately, do what we try to avoid doing a lot of times, is we have to jump forward a little bit into the Gospels as well, because there's a difference in the way that God responds here to somebody touching the ark and the way that Jesus responds when the woman reaches out and touches the edge of his cloak. Both times we've got the presence of God being held in a vessel on earth, but we have two completely different responses, because it's again post-cross, pre-cross, even though technically the story of the woman touching was pre-cross as well. We are now invited to experience God fully in a way that we were not able to in this chapter here in 2 Samuel. We are now invited to come and see, to taste and see, to come, to touch the robe, to experience God in a physical form in a way that was not yet possible here in 2 Samuel. In 2 Samuel, you're dealing with way more, for lack of a better word, I know there is a better word, maybe you'll give it to me when you decide to bust my chops again, but the pageantry level of it. There's a pageantry to it. It was part of the initial instructions that they got when they left Egypt, is you are going to build this box and my spirit is going to rest there. And this is how the nations around you are going to know that my spirit rests there. And we read that in 1 Samuel as well, right? When the ark gets taken away, all the idols of the other gods bow to it. And they not only bow to it, they break when they bow to it. This is not something to mess with. And what we talked about in the past, as far as how do we see the will of God being redemption if he's striking people down just for touching them? I mean, it's a safety measure, is why he's telling people not to touch him, because you can't experience the full glory of God and be able to deal with it. Like it's too much for us to understand and too much for us to comprehend. It's a safety measure more than anything as to why you're not supposed to touch it. the rabbinic text for this passage go one step further, and it's something that Joe, you and I talked about within our conversation about apologetics as well, is that part of the lesson that the rabbis pull from this is this idea of the fact that the lesson was that why do you think the ark must be or why do you think that you are the one that has to protect the presence of God? God is able to protect himself. The ark is going to be okay. God is not going to let a clumsy ox destroy his presence. And that's where I think we get into the other conversations with worship and things like that as far as it relates to the rest of the chapter, is when we get to that side of it. But the first side of it, as far as why does God strike somebody down? Again, it's the time, the place, and the reason why the ark existed is what we have to take into consideration.
Yeah, there's you had made a reference in the middle of that I actually, from a different angle, was researching earlier on this week for a sermon prep that I'm doing for a couple of weeks from now. And you look at the giving of the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament, and you can track through the appearances of the Old Testament, or of the Spirit, throughout the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. And one of the things that is remarkable about that scene that you're referencing, about the pageantry of the ark, the artistry that's involved, comes from the hands of craftsmen and artists who were equipped by the Spirit and sent out to create this. And so, yes, on top of the fact of there being an absolute supernatural divine side of the conversation, it is also created in a way to reflect the magnitude of what this arc is designed for, and all of that. And we are breaking down the first part of the chapter, covering the religious weirdness of the arc and all of that sort of stuff. So given everything that Andrew said, go ahead and jump in and throw in your 2 cents.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it falls under, and I don't want to, kind of be reductive, but it kind of falls under what we've been saying this whole time, is that this is a different time, a different place, a different circumstance, and a different situation. That this is not prescriptive of what God is going to do. This is talking about what God did in these very specific situations. The Ark of the Covenant. Now, I don't want to make a joke of this, but I grew up watching Indiana Jones.
Right.
That's exactly what came to my mind when I was reading it.
I grew up watching Indiana Jones and them digging up the Ark of the Covenant, and they open in the box and everybody dies. I don't, but anyway, what's happening here is that, and I think Andrew hit it, is that at this particular time, the ark represented the very presence of God, and so there was this, there was sacredness of handling the ark properly. And now, if you look back through the 500 years we've been doing the Old Testament, we have covered a lot of very sacred, specific protocols that Israel agreed to. And this is under their covenant agreement with God to handle certain things a certain way, to do things a certain way. And so whenever they broke their agreement, God's interaction with them, from our perspective, would seem harsh. But this is what they were agreeing to. This is how they were agreeing to be held accountable. And this also was a message, I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, Andrew, to the other nations of how powerful God was, how important the Ark of the Covenant, was. That, hey, this is such a serious thing that even the followers of Yahweh, when mishandling it, suffer huge consequences. So imagine what's going to happen when it comes your way, So I think that's what we're looking at here. We're not looking at something that is prescriptive going forward, that we should expect that if you handle the communion cup wrong, that
Right.
you're gonna, that's just taking it way too far and taking it out of context and not letting us rest in the story. And last thing, and I think Andrew, you kind of hit this as it passing by, but the presence of God is no longer in these type of vessels or buildings or any of that kind of thing. The presence of God is with us all the time because of the Holy Spirit. You mentioned Jesus. The presence of God was in Jesus. People were able to touch him and be not murdered, but they would be healed, and going forward even more, the presence of God is dwelling within the believers now. And so we don't have to risk, if we touch this or touch that, it's not the objects that are sacred. All of us are sacred because we are a holy, set apart people.
And it's
good.
You go ahead, because I may be about to jump past where you were going to say. So go ahead.
So the one piece of advice that I would give to anybody when approaching this aspect of the Old Testament, where it's highly supernatural, it's within the realm of things that we are given the framework for why, but we can't really articulate the supernatural metaphysics of everything that's at play. That being said, if we're up to this point approaching scripture, giving it the benefit of the doubt and reading it with authenticity, then let the displays of God's power sit in the same world that has established that actions have consequences.
Yeah.
That up to this point, we have established that God is powerful beyond measure, and that there is a certain code of conduct that should not be reduced down to moralism today, that should not be reduced down into some practice in the modern sense. Read it for what it is at the time that it sits.
Mm-hmm.
And understand that all along the way, listen, do the things that are best for you, no problems. Don't do that, and problems. You know what I mean? Like, yes, it's reductionist to say that. I understand that. But ultimately, we're talking about something that we're never really going to get an A plus B equals C sort of equation for.
Right.
So just let it sit as a component of the overall story that we're working our way through.
Yeah.
Don't try to build any significant framework other than the magnitude and majesty and faithfulness of God's word. Like, even to the point of do this and there's an issue here, he's still faithful to his word.
Yeah. The other interesting thing, and this is kind of jumping around in this chapter a little bit, but there's a very distinct contrast between this story here, and I don't remember what chapter of 1 Samuel, when Saul makes a sacrifice.
Yes.
Because it's really interesting when you start to compare the two passages a little bit, because David is wearing priestly garments and he's not a priest, but yet he's not struck down. He's not rebuked at all, other than his wife. He's not rebuked at all. He is making sacrifices to God, and he's not a priest. He's the king, and we already saw what happened when the king tried. That's what made Saul lose his kingdom. But this is one of the first real acts of David as king in his city that he's doing, and God's blessing it. And but the main differences between the two is we're looking back at the hearts of the people that are doing it. Because Saul, we talked about before, Saul was doing it because of the fact that he thought he could not go into battle without having this thing done. It was a ritual that had to be done before he could go into battle, or else they were going to lose. It was using God as a tool.
Yeah.
David, on the other hand, is just lost in praise of who God is.
Right.
And like the wearing of priestly garments is actually the reason his wife is upset, it was a humbling dress code for him. Because he's the king. He's normally wearing the kingly garments. Now he's dressed as just a priest. That's a step down.
Right.
David, though, sees it as a step up because he's now able to do these things in the presence of God instead of just in the presence of his people. He goes and he's offering sacrifices of praise of the fact that God has entered the city. Not because of the fact he thinks that this is what he needs in order for his army to win. That's where the differences lie. And that's ultimately where, if we were to break down further, that's where we can actually start looking at why, when we take this passage and try to use it to make decisions about what worship should and shouldn't be in today's world, fall apart. Is that all of this is just the fact that we are seeing the fact that it is, even at this time, it is the heart of the person doing it that God is actually concerned about.
Right. And so I wanted to put a definitive point on what we are getting at, and then kick it over to Ant, because I'm very curious about his perspective on this. So what you are getting at is the style of worship and the response, the backlash to the style of worship being carried forward into a modern context, and a not zero amount of people grabbing this as like an enhanced argument, like trying to pull forward her argument to stand on her shoulders to try to make an argument about what today should look like. I'm not trying to be cynical here. I'm really not. This is literally what happens.
One of the first times he's not.
Say, haha. You got to give it a break sometimes. But this is what we're watching play out, and this is what, having been ordained in Ant's church, coming from and getting raised up in that culture, I've seen firsthand the arguments. I wrestled with what I saw the first time that I experienced it, and all of that sort of stuff. So we have to be aware that in the midst of all of this is a cultural component of everything that can be said. It's not just purely theological. It is absolutely cultural as well. So, and within the Sure Foundation ecosystem, there's a lot of expressions of worship. There's dancing, there's miming, there's music, there's all sorts of things, and it's not a worship service in the worship portion of the service for Sure Foundation is not 3 songs and we're into the sermon. Ho! Pack a lunch because you're hanging out for a minute. You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. I'm ribbing a little bit just for sake of the show, but like, seriously, it is extended worship. It is meant for a specific posture, all of that sort of jazz. So you sit in a spot where you very openly do a lot of those things. So when you hear this debate that rages on even to today of not just should we dance, that's the most reductionist perspective that you can take on this. Is it just about dancing? Dancing's a prevalent aspect of the conversation, but I don't think it's just about that. I think it's about how should, like, wrestling with how should worship look for the modern day believer sort of thing, and that whole argument that stems out of this.
Yeah, I think you used cultural context, social environment. I think it's also personal. I think that's what builds the cultural, right? Is the personal.
Mhm.
That's why certain people gravitate to certain styles of worship, certain churches, because it fits their personality more so than it being about theology. And so I think the biggest thing is people's and their preference. There may be people that when it comes down to church, you know, I expect it to be quiet, somber, reflective. But when they listen to their music in their car, they're blasting it and they're bobbing their head, and you're like, wait a minute, why does church have to be quiet, somber, and reflective? But then you can get in your car, you can turn it up, right? Well, that's a personal feeling of that. That's the way I think it should be. That's the way I think it should. So I think when the argument comes up, expressive, non-expressive, um, uh, um, dance, not dance, because Joe kind of touched on it. It is reductive to talk about the dance, but people do focus on the dance, right? That they focus on. Well, look, was Michael right? To chastise David. You're looking like a crazy man out there. Or was David right to say, well, no, you don't understand how important this is, and I'm going to celebrate, and I think this is not about right or wrong.
Right.
I think this is really about reporting what happened and the differences of opinion. But when it comes over to modern day, we like, well, and we don't realize that we're doing this from our own place of personal, preference, even bias at times. That, hey, well, that's just not my my style. I don't do that, and we'll make that a theological statement instead of a personal statement. And I think that's where the problem comes in, is when it becomes a statement of this is theology instead of personality. Like some people just aren't like that. Men, a lot of times, will be like, okay, this is a little much, and that's just from male perspective. But then there's some, because Joe mentioned it, our church is worship expressive, but we're mild compared to some places I've been.
Yeah.
We're actually like, man, they don't let the spirit move in here. Like, well, what do you want us to do? Jump off the ceiling? I mean, what do you want us to do? Where somebody like a Joe comes in like, wow, this is a lot. Somebody else comes in like, oh, that's wow. They don't. This church kind of dead. Like, what?
And that's what, like, I come from I grew up Southern Baptist, which is all hymns, you stand there, no, don't even raise your hand type of thing. I then went to a school that was Quaker. Like, that's silence, everything. And one of the things that I've talked about a lot, and we've done a couple of Misfits episodes on this also, because it blew Brandon, one of my co-hosts' minds at one point when we were in one of our other Bible studies that we were a part of together, when we started this discussion, and everybody else was like, you're monopolizing the time, just discuss this on air. We were talking about is that I went to a Quaker school where we did a lot of looking at the disciplines, the spiritual disciplines and things like that. And the one that everybody talks about is silence. Silence doesn't work for me. Like, silence actually causes me more confusion, because it doesn't. Silence is a distraction. It's not something that can focus me. And a lot of it has to do with, I'm only bringing this up because I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to get hung up on the word you use with preference. Because the argument you hear a lot within evangelicalism is don't go to churches based off of your preferences, because they don't want you're not supposed to be church shopping and all this other kind of stuff. But I think it comes down to much more of it's about who God to be. What is your story with who God is? that plays out more with a lot of it than I think anything else. Because the conversation that Brand and I had was on this idea of should you sing in church or not, not as a whole, but just as an individual. And for me, singing in a congregation doesn't do anything. There's no worship value at all when I'm with a bunch of people singing type of thing. I normally don't sing Sunday morning. But the reason is because when a lot of my major spiritual wrestling and development, where God and I were having way more one-on-one time than I probably wanted, was in the midst of times when I was being isolated, I was being rejected, I was being cast aside. And so now for me, when I'm with a bunch of other Christians, hearing a bunch of other Christians together sing as one voice to the same God is way more healing and encouraging than my voice being the one doing it. But that's because of my past experiences with God, is that a lot of my heavy God experiences came when I was alone in darkness. And so now the ability to experience other people having the same love and appreciation for God in one body is way more powerful.
Yep.
Because it's not even, and that's the only reason I say it, beyond preference, I think the personal aspect of who God is with a person plays a much bigger role in this than at least within a lot of more white evangelical, white reformed denominations than we realize. Within a lot of other mainline denominations, everything is liturgical, and so everything is repeated, but it's repeated with a purpose. Like there's no way to deny what is going on. Joe, you talk about it occasionally within Buddy Walk as far as rhythms, right? It's the rhythms of Scripture and the rhythms of God and the rhythms of life, and that's part of what liturgy is supposed to do, is help with that. And so we don't need to back away from the idea of preference the way that we typically do, because a lot of it comes down to what is it that God has done in your life that has led you to this point?
Yeah.
Because that is what you're going to be worshiping God for.
Yeah, and to tie the two together, the whole preference thing includes the aspects of worship that draw you in.
Yeah.
Well, that work well for your temperament, for your personality, all of that. Preference isn't just what type of music do I like.
Right.
It is, how is this reflecting rhythms of life for me that draw me closer to Jesus in the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And so I don't, and mind you, like, I can sit here and preach and say about how we need to be more widely accepting and all of that sort of stuff of different worship styles and all of that, but that has to come hand in hand with the story of the first time that I went out for a weekend in Colorado, and I was at Sure Foundation Church, and part of what so there were three main events that took place over the course of the weekend, and I'm telling the story of my ordination weekend.
Okay.
There were three main events. There was a worship conference, or a worship concert, a men's speaking engagement, and then Sunday morning service. And it happened so it was that Friday night, and I'm in the back, I'm running sound for this whole thing, and man, I see two guys get up there and they start miming for Jesus. I'm not kidding, miming for Jesus, because I know for truth, I am not the only person who has never heard of this before seeing it live and in front of my face. So there's a young man out of the two of them. His name is Jeremiah, right? I have that right? Yeah, Jeremiah. And by young man, I mean like the guy was just right on the cusp of graduating high school when I was out there, like a younger dude. And he comes back after the thing goes. And I looked at him and I was like, okay, you're going to have to explain this one to me because I have never seen this before in my life. And he did. And he's like, this is the point. So this is why we paint our faces the way that we do. This is why miming specifically, this is what this was supposed to mean. And this is what that's supposed to mean. And he's kind of breaking down the entire thing. And I'm like, okay, am I ever in life going to paint my face and get in front of people and mime for Jesus? I'm going to go with no. Unfortunately, never say never, but I'm going to go with no. But it's one of those things that you have to look at it and say, no, this is reasoned. This is intentional. Everything is done with something in mind. It's not just, hey, let me go make a spectacle of myself and call it Jesus flavored. And I think sometimes we run into the trap of making an assumption before we stop and learn what's actually happening under the hood. Because on the East Coast, folks with flags doing that style of dancing and all of that, I'm not going to say it's demonized, but it is absolutely viewed in a specific context by and large, unless you're at one of the local AOG churches or something along those lines. And you are actually experiencing it like in the service. Outside of that, that's that charismatic thing. That's that thing that like it's all just about show and spectacle and yada yada yada. So it was a weird juxtaposition to be doing a residency in a much more somber worship environment and then experience this and all of that sort of stuff and this kind of being. And it's funny because I when I preach at the church that I preach at now, I am a much different flavor than any of the other preaching that's going to be happening at that church. And part of that is, again, it goes back to preference, man. Like, I don't necessarily have a preference personally. I don't think there's nothing really that stands out as like, other than like fog machines and like a ridiculous amount of lights. I don't need any of that. But like, but preaching, no, for the love of everything that's holy, can the dude in the front of the room act like he cares to be there? Like, seriously, show me something. Show me a little fire. You know what I mean? Like, not hellfire and brimstone, but like, come on.
Let's say, yeah, be careful with that wish.
Right.
We're sitting here talking about this. Could we, you know what I mean? Could we get a little bit of energy here in the whole 9 yards? That's not for everybody. Some people think that that's making a spectacle of yourself and all of that sort of stuff. Like, every one of these things can be dissected. That's the point. And so again, this is another brick in the wall when we're starting to say, or when we've been saying, different time, different place, and some things sit in the lens of antiquity, but other things sit in the lens of a very human expression of the interaction between human and divine.
And the other thing that we see pulled forward is what you just described out of this chat, is that the response of Michael is something that we see pulled forward by a lot of people, not necessarily word for word, but the attitude is exactly what you just described, right? It's we make the assumption that can't be real worship, that it's all a spectacle, that it's all whatever you want to call it, that it's immodest, whatever it is, which, that's one of the things I always find funny is that, the English translation have all become even more undignified than this, right? Out of this passage, right?
Yeah.
That's what he says. That's what he says. But I see people that will take it and say, well, David danced naked before the Lord.
No, not exactly.
But, that was Michael's accusation.
Right.
That was what she assumed he was doing. He's dressed as a priest. Like he's not running around naked. He's dressed as a priest. But the assumption was that it was all for show.
Right.
When David was really like, what are you talking about? Like, did you not just see the fact that God's presence is back in the middle of the camp? Like, this is a callback to what we spent all that time on within Exodus and Leviticus, right? This God's presence is back within the camp. And so the community is back centered around God, even though there's now a king instead of a prophet leading them. The king is the one that is saying, like, look, God is at the center of all of this.
Yep.
And the assumption, though, was that it couldn't be that way. And maybe the assumption, and this, I mean, and, unfortunately, a lot of the people, at least that I've had these discussions with, the assumption is there because they've never experienced anything different. Michael never experienced anything different because, her dad becomes king.
Right.
Her dad starts out on the right foot, but then when her dad made a sacrifice, he lost the throne. And so the motive of Saul is not the motive of David, but Michael has never seen anything different. And so of course she's going to assume that this is the same motive when it's not.
Right. Yeah. I want to piggyback off that because I'm glad you hit that point that Michael's father is Saul.
Right.
I mean, so that's what she's comparing it to, and, I don't want to get into like psychology, but a lot of little girls compare a lot of things when it comes down to men to what they experience in their home, right? Mm-hmm. Their father, right? And so what's interesting is that Saul was more of a politician. David is more of a worshiper and a warrior.
Yeah.
So these are contrasting personality traits. David is, exuberant about worship. He's writing songs. He's a musician. I mean, he's a different guy. Whereas Saul was more of a politician. He was more, cerebral or within himself, doing the things that he was doing. He wasn't very expressive. He wasn't, into a lot of those things. As a matter of fact, and I'll give you a perfect example, there was a time where Saul was with the prophets, and it said that he was singing, and the word prophecy and sing were interchangeable. They were like, "What?" People were shocked. They were shocked to see him with the prophets, right? Because they're like, "What? This guy, he doesn't sing, he doesn't speak like he doesn't." Whereas the people around David, they didn't have a problem with that. But Michael, she's like, wait a minute, that's not what is he doing? That's not the way a king should act, because that wasn't her experience with the king. She grew up in a household with a king.
And we see that later in the New Testament also, right? At Pentecost. Right, the when the Spirit comes down and all the apostles start prophesying, it was like, well, they just had too much to drink.
Right, they're drunk
because they haven't seen any kind of move of the Spirit in over 400 years. Like, of course, then obviously it's just they're drunk, but the reality was the Spirit of God was moving. But when we've never seen it, or actually, I'm going to change the way I said it. When we've never been taught to be open to seeing it, is how I'm going to say it.
Or I think even better, we've never experienced that expression.
Right.
I remember when Joe was going through the book of Acts, he had said something. He said, "Man, the expressions of worship were interesting as I went through the book of Acts." Because I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a different expression. We're not saying one is right or wrong.
Right. That's a very important point, and I bet you all didn't think that we were going to go 45 on 2 Samuel 6. But no. Jokes aside, though, like I think it's a yes and between what you two said, because and one of my favorite things is when I watch Andrew's spider senses go off and he knows I'm going to bust his chops over his wording and he corrects himself first before I get a chance to. But it's true. Like what he said is true, is that if you are discipled by a context, a situation, a person, a group, whatever, if you are influenced in a context that does not support being aware, and I'll even go in the best case scenarios, appreciative of the multiplicity of contexts of worship, then what Ant said kicks in. You know what I mean? Like so one kind of leads into the other, and so it's one of those things that, like, we kind of danced around it. Andrew even kind of flirted with it a little bit. What I'll say is, if you find all of this, if you listen to all of this, and you're like, these men have lost the rabbit on what it means to be carrying themselves with dignity and, catch the word, purity, and that's your basis for what you think is wrong about, usually this most commonly emphasizes dancing, but any kind of inappropriate whatever, with zero nuance, with zero care to what the actual, like, substance of it is or anything like that, just blanket, we're now sitting at the realm of sin, or we're now sitting at the realm of immorality or anything else like that, and it's all driven by that, then I might point you to the part of the conversation that rests within the context of purity culture, because that's a can of worms that is an entirely different conversation that I don't necessarily think is best served for right now, especially because we have hinted at it in all. But you may want to start to investigate why you have the passionate stances that you have about these things, and even if it's not driven by purity culture, if it's just driven by a lack of willingness to acknowledge somebody else's context, we'll say. Again, those are big questions. You should wrestle with those questions, and it is chapters of the Bible like this one, not because anything like, wow, startlingly grandiose happened. It's more the fact that it touches on relevant concepts that we still will wrestle with today, that we still will find issue with today.
And if you're somebody that, because I think I like the word better rather than, I think the word you said was appreciative, I think is the best word, as far as, at least that's the first step to being able to start seeing stuff, is to be able to appreciate the fact it's there. You know, if you're one that is struggling with that, if nothing else, how to appreciate it, or, you know, you're not, like, the purity culture thing doesn't matter to you, any of that, is just, you've been told what I have found, at least within a lot of people, is that it starts with our understanding of the Holy Spirit. And so there's two quick KFM spotlights I want to shine real fast for people that are in that. One of them is to go listen to the Buddy Walk with Jesus episode that came out yesterday, because Joe broke the Holy Spirit down piece by piece by piece. The second one is to go over to the Misfits blog and scroll down to the one on 1 Thessalonians 5. Because I came out of both a complementarian and cessationist, which are just big theological terms for the stuff we were talking about, theologies. And the blog I have written breaks down where those arguments originated from and where Scripture stands on them to get to the point of the conversation we were having today. And the unfortunate thing, I'm going to just spoiler alert for all of you, is that it's a combination of the theology stuff that Joe talked about yesterday on Buddy Walk, and it also is the cultural stuff that Joe and Ant were already talking about as well. Because there is levels of a not being willing to appreciate other cultures that is attached to not being able to appreciate other types of worship.
Yeah, exactly. And we're not trying to give folks a hard time when we come in and zero in on certain concepts or certain groups of people or certain behaviors or whatever the case may be. It's simply trying to provide Bible-based resources for folks to be able to engage well with these concepts and to have a clear understanding of what does the Bible say versus what is our individual stances or perspectives
or experiences.
Yeah. So, all right. Now that we have thoroughly gone through 2 Samuel, let's go ahead and jump into chapter 7.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Ministry Misfit Media in association with Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. The Ministry Misfits theme song is written and produced by J.D. Laird and Laird Creative Agency. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also visit our website at www.ministrymisfits.com or through bio.link/ministrymisfits. If you would like to support Ministry Misfits, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/ministrymisfits.